I don't hate the phrase crazy cat lady because it's cruel. I hate it because it's lazy. It's something people say to make themselves feel tidy about loneliness. As if a woman hugging a tabby pillow and drinking tea at 9 p.m. is a cute cartoon instead of a human being trying not to drown in silence. The phrase turns an ache into a punchline. It tells you everything you need to know, so you don't have to look any deeper. It lets you assume without asking. Assumption is how people miss the fact that what looks like a hobby can also be a vow. The statues in my living room aren't decorations. The framed prints of sleek cats with almond eyes aren't ironic. The bowls, the etched glass tumblers with paw prints, the blankets, the shirts, none of it is a phase, and none of it is for show. They are offerings, altars. I owe my cats everything. It started the year my father killed my mother. Back then, I was 11 and built like a half-deflated parade balloon. My hair, an unruly rope of Irish and Italian ancestry, fell to my waist in a frizzy sheet. School was a daily referendum on my wrongness. Children have a way of sniffing out whatever makes you break and taking turns pressing on it like a bruise. I begged my parents for a dog. A golden retriever like in the commercial soft fur. Soft mouth. Soft life. My father, who worked construction and drank like it was a second job, said we didn't need a third problem. My mother, who did the math on every bill 5 times, whispered that dogs were expensive and needed walks and time and stability we didn't have. On my 11th birthday, when no one from my class came, when the cake was just the 3 of us and the serial killer cheer of boxed frosting, my father went to the car and came back with a huge gift box. It wobbled. My heart rose on a rope. I tore off the lid and stared at not a dog. Not even close. What I met had lacquer black fur, triangular ears, and amber eyes that glowed like a hot coal in the dark. He looked like a Halloween cutout come to life. The disappointment shocked tears into my throat, and then he looked up, blinked slow, and everything inside me sat down. Cats are easier, my mother said, trying to sound hopeful. I named him Spook because he startled me into feeling anything besides a hunger I couldn't name. Within a month, Spook slept on my chest, and I slept a little less like someone expecting an earthquake. He loved boxeses. Every cat will choose the humble box over the expensive trousseau. When my father bought a 9-foot cat tower with a grumble about my mother's nagging, Spook inspected it with reverence and then belly flopped into the carton it came in. My father kept placing him on the tower. Spook kept leaping down, thumping into the box like a falling pillow. I laughed until my sides hurt. That night, for the first time in a long time, my house held something that sounded like joy. A week later, for Halloween, I went as a cat. My mother drove me all over town to find a box big enough for a photograph. She had this idea of me crouched inside it like Spook, and she wanted to send it to my grandmother. She smiled in the rearview mirror when we found the right size. We took one picture. One. Then she threw the box in the garage. It is funny, in a way only hindsight can be, that her last kindness was finding me a place to hide. My father came home late. He had the staggering, sing-song walk I recognized by sound. Shoes off. Then silence. Then a wet rip in the air that I did not understand until my mother screamed. She shouted for me to run. I ran. The kitchen flashed past. My own room flashed past. And I ended up in the pantry, folded behind bags of flour. The crash of glass. The squeal of wood under force. A hand slapping something soft. A scream, a shot. Then quiet. Except for his feet. He shuffled heavy. Here, kitty. He called in a voice meant for me and meant for Spook. And it didn't matter which he meant. I heard a soft trill. A purr. A hiss. A scream. A snap. No more screams. I don't remember leaving the pantry. I don't remember the police, or the neighbor who called them, or who found me. What I do remember lives in my ear like water from the deep end. my music box. The one that played an Anastasia waltz when you wound it, squalling the last broken notes of a dying song. I remember the garage. I remember the big box from my Halloween photo. I remember pulling a strip of packing tape so slow my hands shook and hearing it lay down with a whisper that seemed louder than a gun. I remember closing the flap over my head and listening to my father curse and cry and throw things until the night felt empty and then fell apart. After the funeral and the trial and the complicated pity that neighbors brew for a child with nowhere to place her rage, I moved in with my grandparents. My grandfather brought home a Russian blue kitten with pale eyes like a winter sky. I named her Luna. She was elegant and exacting, lavishing tongue sandpaper grooming on me when I cried, swatting my ankles when I laughed too loud. She taught me what company feels like. She taught me to sit still. She taught me how silence can be a blanket when it isn't a void. I began to copy her. I curled into boxes when I got anxious. I liked the way corrugation cradled my back. I ate tuna from the can one afternoon because I wanted to know if the smell I loved on her breath could be mine. It was awful, and I did it again the next day. Then I hissed at a teacher who compared me to a zoo exhibit. She had caged me for detention and made a joke about how animals don't get to go home early. I barely remember biting her. I do remember the court date that followed. The doctor who nodded and hummed and wrote down words like trauma while looking at me like a crossword clue. And I remember Luna being given away. My grandparents had had enough. My grief became something I began to control the only way I knew how. I learned to be sick on purpose. Spite feels like power when you have none. I fed the bowl and the toilet in equal measure. And in the space of a year, I became smaller, lighter, and sharp around the edges. Saturdays. Those Saturdays were sanctuary. I volunteered at the no-kill shelter downtown as soon as I was old enough to sign the waiver. There, the cats were citizens and sages. Whiskers, who would headbutt your knee when you thought you were invisible. Boots, who slept all afternoon and then darted after a paper ball like he'd remembered he was a creature of chase. Crookshanks, who didn't like anyone and, on a good day, tolerated me. I learned that love could be a chosen ritual. I learned to scoop litter and measure medicine and avoid loud voices and move slowly. And when the world outside was a static hiss, I could always disappear into a room of softly blinking eyes. I worked. I studied. I stopped biting people. I graduated. I earned a scholarship to a respectable college 3 states away. I dyed my hair a kind of slate that made my skin look warmer. And I learned how late a person can stay awake and still function. I left my grandparents a note on the fridge when I moved out, and they waved at me through the screen like I was the neighbor kid heading off to camp. At freshman orientation, I sat with my knees pressed together and my notes lined up by color. An English major named Owen sat beside me, glanced at the grumpy cat on my notepad, and said he knew exactly what that face felt like. He had eyes like frost and hair the color of Spook's dark coat. He whispered jokes during the dean's speech and made me feel, absurdly, like the room had shrunk to fit us. When he asked what I was studying, and I said veterinary medicine, he groaned theatrically and asked if it was an 8-year sentence. It was, and I smiled in a way that felt like putting down a backpack. After the speech, he said he'd see me around. Kitten. And I understood that I had decided to love him before he had finished standing up. Our first coffee date turned into 3 hours. Our first year turned into a lease. By sophomore fall, we shared an apartment with hand-me-down furniture and cat-shaped salt shakers. Owen brought his family cat, a dignified old Tom named Murphy, from back home. On our anniversary, we adopted 2 more, Miko, a ginger with a stutter-step curiosity, and Kiro, a tuxedo with a hunter's heart who watched from shadows and struck without warning. The apartment became a small cathedral. We cooked and cleaned and took turns with the litter box. We watched old movies in black and white while Murphy pretended not to understand the plot and Miko chased the shadows of our hands. At night, I purred against Owen's chest and stretched long and slow, batting his mouth with machinoid kisses when he moved too fast. We were good. We were better than anything in the brochures. Happiness is a lake that looks solid until one day you put your foot down and go through. In the second semester of junior year, the ice groaned. Owen started staying out late. He said he needed to study at the library, but his breath smelled like hops and something careless. He became impatient. He stared at the ceiling while I talked. He said he felt pinned in by all the cat stuff, all the shelves and prints and tchotchkes. He asked me to cool it with the altars, and he said the word with a laugh that didn't land anywhere kind. I told him the truth, which was that these things weren't ornaments, but obedience. Not to a god, but to a promise. I told him what Spook had done. I told him how I had lived. He said he understood. He said he did. He didn't. He called me a freak under his breath and moved out on a Wednesday, which is the kind of day people choose when they want to pretend a rupture is just a logistics problem. He took his clothes and his books and Murphy, who blinked sadly at me from the carrier as if to say it wasn't his call. The apartment felt huge when he was gone. It had an echo. I tried to make the echo talk back to me by filling it with chores. I became crisp. I cleaned the counters with a military focus. I put on a movie and didn't look at it. I refreshed feeds. I searched phrases like how to win him back and how to show you're sorry even when you aren't sure for what. I found his social media. I found the woman. Riley Park. Another English major sharp bob. Clever grin. Photos of her holding a latte like a talisman. They smiled together. They drank. He put an arm around her waist in one picture, and in another, she wore a sweatshirt with a cartoon cat on it and a caption that read "Crazy Cat Girl at Heart." The phrase made the tendons in my neck strain. Cats are not accessories. Cats are not brand alignment. Cats are teachers. If the internet had a smell, I would have smelled the lie. I called him. I saw the pictures. I said, and I told him he didn't have to listen to her. That he didn't have to perform a version of himself that fit a caption. I told him that Murphy could come back any time. That there was always a bowl with his name. He said nothing. I could hear the soft rush of the call still connected. Then he exhaled and hung up. A week later, at 3:22 a.m., on a Saturday in May, my phone lit up with a voicemail. I played it. Then I played it again. Then I played it 27 more times before I realized what I was hearing. "Mara," he said, and hearing my name in his voice cracked something that had healed crooked. I wasn't going to call. It didn't feel right to leave it like that. We're not going to work. I can't do it. The cat thing. The staying in. The way you make our place into a shrine—it's just not for me. You're wonderful. You deserve someone who loves all of you. Riley's better for me. She loves cats too. She said your names for the kittens were smart. She said she's a crazy cat lady herself. Maybe one day we can be friends. She wants to meet you." He stopped. In the thin hiss of the voicemail, a second breath. Not his. Close to the receiver. Then withdrawing. Then close again. I hung up and sat very still. Hiro watched me from the hallway, pupils wide enough to swallow. He vanished and reappeared like a blink. Then, as morning thinned the darkness, he left the apartment and returned through the back door with a gift. It was a robin, red-breasted, bright as a wound. He laid it at my feet on the concrete stoop, and he waited for me to understand. Cats are not moralists. Cats are messengers. They do not wrap their instincts in words like fairness. They show you what the world is made of. And they ask you a question. Will you act like a creature who pays attention to what is true? I cleaned the kitchen until the cloth bled gray. I scrubbed my hands until they stung and then scrubbed them again. I lined up the bowls. I lit 3 candles and placed them in front of the prints on the bookshelf bee-stung faces of stylized cats with gold rings around their heads. I placed the robin on a saucer and laid a sprig of basil across its back the way you might lay a napkin on a knee at a nice restaurant. Offerings. Properly presented. I wrote a list in a neat veterinary script like a dose chart. Spook, sacrifice. Luna, loss. Murphy, loyalty. Miko, play. Hero, hunt. By late afternoon, I had a plan. And it worked like purring, automatic. Rib deep. First, I changed into clothes that moved quiet. Black jeans. Soft shoes. I gathered what I needed and placed it into a cardboard box from the closet. A box is a room you can carry. It makes you both present and unseen. If you think this is ridiculous, you have never tried to be alive and invisible at the same time. Second, I walked to the bars near campus and learned the clockwork of Riley's week. People post their lives in public like they are asking to be understood. Tuesdays at the poetry open mic. Thursdays at the gastropub with the chalkboard menu. Saturdays, the rooftop bar above the old hotel. String lights like captured fireflies. Laughter catching on the edges of glasses. I learned where the cameras were and where they weren't. I learned how the alley behind the hotel smelled of tar and stale beer and the sweet pinch of cut limes rotting in a bin. I learned that the exit door had a panic bar that stuck, and that if you wedged the latch with a napkin, you could make the door hush like a secret. Third, I waited. Patience is a kind of prayer. When it was time, I arrived early and slid my box into the shadowed corner beside the dumpsters. On the side farthest from the camera, I had cut 2 small circles on either end so I could see and breathe. I had my hands in gloves because clean is part of reverence. I was not hiding to be sly. I was preparing to love deeply enough to defend the lessons I had been given. Inside, the music was something that would sound embarrassingly dated in 2 years. Laughter came out in bursts. I could hear the scrape of chair legs against the rooftop, and the sound traveled down the stairwell like a coin in a chute. I waited until I heard Owen's laugh. I have never loved and hated anything so much as I hated that laugh then, because it meant he felt easy while I did not. The stairwell door squealed. I crouched lower. Riley came down first. Alone, thumbing her phone, the light throwing a salt-white rectangle across her face. She paused at the exit to adjust her hair in the dark glass. Behind her, a woman in a sequin top held the door for a man with a tray. The man bumped the tray on the rail and swore, and knocked the napkin from my earlier wedge out of the latch. The exit closed with a metallic tongue of sound. Riley had to push it open again. It swung wide. She stepped into the alley. I let it close. I stepped out of the box like smoke, not thinking of anything human, only of process. She turned and saw me, and I did not look like what she expected. I wasn't a wild-eyed caricature. No hair-tearing banshee. I was neat. My voice was low and calm. She said my name and then corrected herself when she realized she didn't know it. I told her who I was. I told her that I had heard how she loved cats. I have 3, she said as if it were a credential. Names, I said, because names matter. Names mean you understand that a being is not a prop. She gave me the names too quickly, the way someone lists ingredients they have read but never cooked. Riley had no idea she had already failed the test. You don't have to be afraid, I said, and she laughed in a brittle ribbon. Afraid of what? She said, and then smiled in a way that asked me to be on her side. Of being found out, I said. I made the sound that saved my life twice, once in the pantry, once in the garage, only now I made it on purpose. A purr, a soft rolling R in my throat. I stepped closer. A meow, light as a tap on glass. And then, when she lifted her chin at me like I'd asked for her attention in a way she didn't sanction, I hissed. It is a small miracle what a hiss can do. People are animals all the way down. Riley flinched and took a step back. She put a hand in the air like a crossing guard and told me to calm down. It was a poor choice of command. Calm down is what you say when you want to win without earning it. There's a story you tell about yourself, I said, and it is presumably charming. A quirky girl with cats. That story is a blanket you use to smother people like me. It makes you cute and makes me a case study. You're scaring me, she said, and I heard in her voice what I should have felt. I did not feel it. I lifted the box lid and took out the saucer. The robin lay on its back, red breast up like a flag. I set it on the ground between us. You don't have to accept the gift, I said. You only have to look. She stared from the bird to my face and back. She told me I needed help. She told me I was sick. She told me that Owen was worried about me. At his name, a door opened somewhere behind my sternum and the wind came through. I breathed it in. I thought of Spook, lungs chuffing as he ran to the living room that night, choosing without language. I thought of Luna, placed in a carrier and walked out of my life in a straight line that felt like a sentence. I thought of Kiro setting the gift at my feet, head tilted, waiting for me to be as brave as an animal. I'm not here to hurt you, I said, and I meant it. What are you here to do? To ask you to stop lying to my life. She didn't understand the sentence. It wasn't designed for someone who speaks like captions. She picked up her phone. She said she was calling security. She said the word restraining order like it was a charm. If you have never watched a cat hunt, you missed that it is mostly waiting. The actual strike is just punctuation. I moved fast then, but not violently. I slid the saucer closer to her shoe and crouched over it, and keeping my eyes on hers, lifted the bird in both hands and pressed it gently to my chest the way I used to press my face into Luna's ribs to hear the wash and click of her tiny machine. Blood seeped onto the front of my shirt. Riley gagged. This is not pretty, I said. It is true. The exit door banged open behind her, and Owen's voice came down the stairs like somebody else's bad decision. He saw us and stopped. He took in the bird and the blood and the way I was kneeling on the concrete like a person at prayer, and he said my name with the softness of a question you are afraid to ask. Mara, he said. Come on. Put that down. Please. Still kneeling. I turned my head and looked at him the way Miko looks at the space where I hide treats. Reckoning. I set the robin back on the saucer. I stood up and stepped away from Riley. I said that I was going to leave. I said that we would not speak again. I said that if I ever heard the phrase crazy cat anything come off their tongues in connection with my name, I would come to where they were and I would make the sound again, not because I wanted to frighten, but because some people need a door slammed to understand there is one. I picked up my box. Riley made a noise like a fork scraped over ceramic. Owen said thank you in a way that made it clear he was thanking the universe and not me. I walked out of the alley and didn't look back. I walked past the line of people waiting to go up the stairs and thought how strange it is that life keeps its appointments even when you cancel. At home, I set the saucer on the steps again and let Kiro examine my work. He sniffed the robin and trilled approval, then trotted inside to his bowl. I scrubbed my hands and my shirt. I put the gloves in a bag and tied it in a knot as small and tight as a heartbeat. I blew out the candles. It should have ended there. And in a way it did. Owen never called again. Riley posted a story the next day about a scary encounter that involved a mentally unstable ex. And I reported it for harassment from 3 accounts and never checked whether the report did anything. I cleaned the apartment and studied and slept and fed the cats and thought about the sound of the music box dying. I told myself the truth. I had not saved anyone or hurt anyone or won anything or lost anything. I had done something else. I had made an offering. I had returned to the altar with what I had, which was a body and a memory and a sharp feeling that needed to be named. Summer came in with the damp slap of July and stayed. The shelter filled and emptied and filled again. I took stool samples in the mornings and temperature readings in the afternoons, and my notes multiplied. I was not healed. I was not broken. I was a person with a job and a lease and a vow. I do not call myself anything. The labels people love are shorthand for things they haven't held long enough to understand. I go shopping at the thrift store, and sometimes I find a porcelain cat with a chipped ear, and I bring it home and wash it and put it on the shelf, and it belongs there as if it always did. I prepare their bowls. I sweep up the spilled litter. I say the names out loud when I place the dishes on the floor. Miko. Hiro. The door stays open in my mind in case Spook ever finds his way back. Which is ridiculous and also not ridiculous at all. I say those names like you would say grace. On a Sunday night in August, I woke to the small clatter of where the plates live. I padded barefoot to the kitchen. Hiro sat very straight, ears pinned forward, looking out the window. I flicked on the porch light and saw it, another robin. The red of its chest was a coin in the light. Heads up for luck. I opened the door, and the warm air laid itself over my shoulders like a heavy shawl. You're relentless, I said to Hiro, who did not deny it. I went back to bed and lay on my side with my palm under my ear the way Luna taught me to hold still for the rise and fall of another creature. In the darkness, I admitted something I had kept folded, like a letter I wasn't ready to read. That night when my father called into the living room here. Kitty. He was speaking to me, and he was speaking to Spook, and there is no difference worth considering between those two invitations. One creature answered. One creature lived. That is how favor works. It is not moral, and it is not fair. Worship is what you build when you decide that if grace is not fair, you will at least make it consistent. So here's what I learned because of the cats. If you want silence, fill it with a ritual. If you want mercy, perform it before you demand it. If you want peace, live within the lines of your attention. If you want justice, do not pretend you can straighten the crooked with a slogan. Let your life be a series of small, exacting acts, each presented as carefully as a bird on a plate. And let the meaning accrue like a purr you feel long before you hear. And this because people always want to know if the story has a proper end. This is how it ends. I did not marry. I did not become a recluse either. I became the person you wish you had working in your vet's office on the day the waiting room is full and the printer is jammed and your tabby refuses to be coaxed out of the carrier. I am the voice that says it's okay. We will do this one breath at a time. I am the hands that hold with confidence. The photos on my wall are of former shelter cats sleeping in sunny windows in homes where they are wanted. Sometimes clients give me cat mugs or cards with calico cartoons. I keep them in a drawer. Not all offerings belong on the altar. Out back, the steps stain the way old concrete does when it learns too much weather. Birds come and go. Hiro grows older. Miko's face turned white around the muzzle last winter, and he looks perpetually astonished by his own gentleness. I sit with them at dusk. The air hums like it remembers heat. The city speaks the thousand-mouthed language of itself. I listen. If I close my eyes, I can hear the smallest sound, the one below the ears, a purr that is not mine or theirs, but the world's, as if the day, despite itself, is content to end again. If you think this is a happy ending, you are right. If you think it is something else, you are also right. It is the ending cats would approve of, which is to say it doesn't end at all. It settles. It coils. It waits. It holds still, and then when the time comes acts without apology. Because the truth is simple and hard, cats never let me down. And on the nights when something small and red is laid at my door like a lesson, I rise and wash my hands and light the candles and say thank you for the clarity. Then I blow out the candles and go to bed. And in the morning I make coffee and scoop litter and go to work and hold the soft body of whatever needs holding. That is what worship looks like when you build it out of a life. Not tinsel, not captions, not a costume you can take off when the party gets boring. You assemble your days like a shrine. You place inside it what is true. And when you hear a sound in the dark that could be a purr or a growl, you do not turn away. You face it, and you answer. If you read this far, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What did the story raise for you about violence inside families and the unfairness that sometimes follows us for years? How do you think we should respond to harm punishment, mercy, or something in between? Share your perspective in the comments and take a stand. The conversation matters as much as the ending.